The greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips. They walk out the door and deny him by their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world simply finds unbelievable. There was a crackly recording of that quote. It's a quote from Brennan Manning, if you're familiar with him. It's a crackly recording of that served as the introduction to a song by DC Talk, which some of you may remember. The song was titled, "What If I Stumble?" And that song and the introduction that they used for it there from Brennan Manning, back in 1996 when it came out, I was graduating from high school, and that song hit me like right between the eyes. And I'm still convicted by it even today. I'm not going to try to quote the whole song, but I would encourage you to pull it up on whatever your media player of choice is, DC Talk, "What If I Stumble?" and listen to it at some point. The chorus goes, "What if I stumble? What if I fall? What if I lose my step and I make fools of us all? Will the love continue when my walk becomes a crawl? What if I stumble and what if I fall?" So we've looked at, in the last several times that I've spoken, and I think Ethan's been doing some in Genesis as well. I know we've been doing some in Genesis as well. We've been trying to work through Genesis in a not super organized manner, but primarily because the teens are studying Genesis 26 through 50 for Bible Bowl. The last several times that I've spoken about characters in Genesis. The main characters that we've looked at so far, that I've looked at so far, were all primarily men, is the ones I've talked about, and they've all messed up royally, right? The key text seems to be the passage from Genesis 50, that what they intended for evil, God intends for good. Joseph, who we looked at first, he was this pompous little brat, 11th son, who was treated like he was the firstborn by his father, until he was finally humbled by being put into slavery and then into jail, and then elevated again by God to be the instrument that God would choose to save his people, to save all of Egypt from the horrible famine that hit the lands while he was there. And then also he was used to prepare a place where the children of Israel could go there in Goshen and become a nation, really, and that they could grow into a nation while the iniquity of the Ammonites was becoming complete. Amorites, excuse me. Judah, we talked about second. Judah was an older brother of Joseph's. He was the fourth son of Jacob, and he was a jealous sort. He was so jealous of Jacob that he convinced his brothers to sell him into slavery. He was one of the primary ones that can convince them to sell Joseph into slavery. And he continues to circle the drain as he gives in to the lust of the flesh and the lust of the eyes and the pride of life, until finally he too is humbled. He's humbled by his daughter-in-law. And he's turned by the hand of the master into the father of kings. Their dad, we talked about Jacob a little bit. Their dad was a heel-grasping deceiver from the very first breath. But like clay in the hands of the potter, he's molded into God's chosen vessel to carry forward God's plan for his family. Plan to make a nation in which all of the nations, all of the families of the world will be blessed. Today, I decided to look a little bit at Esau. And so the teens get a little bit of a double dose of this, but that's okay. Today decided to look at the story of Esau. And Esau's story begins in Genesis chapter 25, there with his birth with Jacob, and Jacob grasping his heel. And it continues on for 11 chapters, through chapter 36, I guess that's 12 chapters. But continues on through chapter 36. And in chapter 36, we get this pretty concentrated discussion about Esau's descendants. I don't know about you, but genealogies are kind of rough. I don't love studying genealogies, but there are often some nuggets in there, in those genealogies. Like one of the fascinating little nuggets in chapter 36 is who is this guy Seir the Horite? I mean, he doesn't seem to fit anywhere in that genealogy. Who is that guy? I mean, perhaps he's in there because Esau is going to end up living in the hill country of Seir. Esau and Edom become interchangeable terms in the text, and Esau and his descendants end up living in the hill country of Seir. And so perhaps it's because of the association there that they're going to live in the same area. Or perhaps the text is emphasizing the connection between Aholibama, one of the descendants of Seir, who also turns out to be one of Esau's wives. Aholibama, the descendant of Seir the Horite, is a member of the giant clan. If you want to look back at that, you can look at Genesis 14 and kind of work from there. I'll leave that one with you to chew on in your own time. Another thing that you could potentially chew on about the wives there is that their names differ in chapter 36 than they do in chapter 26 and 28. And so perhaps these three women that are named in chapter 36, Adah, Aholibama, and Basemath, perhaps they're the same women with different names. Perhaps there was more than three wives, but we only get three at a time. But that's something else to kind of chew on there about Esau's wives. I think that it tends to be the first option, where they're just named different things in different contexts. But the text is consistent in stating that Esau first marries two women that are of Canaanite descent. Canaanite descent. Descendants of Canaan, the son of Ham, who Noah curses after Ham exposes Noah's nakedness. Noah was laying there drunk in his tent when Ham exposed his nakedness and laughs, and when Noah wakes up, he curses Canaan. I think that we're supposed to see a connection between Canaan, where he's told that he's going to serve Shem and Japheth, and where Esau here has been told that he's going to serve Jacob. Noah's drunkenness is another connection between these two stories. Sorry, I'm getting out of my notes here. There's certainly other connections there, but Noah's drunkenness is paired somewhat with Esau selling his birthright for that bowl of lentil stew that we've talked about. How are those two connected, you say? Those are very different ideas. Selling a bowl of stew, or selling a birthright for a bowl of stew and becoming drunk. How are those connected? Well, both texts are relating to food, and both sort of serve as tests for these individuals. Both are examples of gluttony. The overindulgence or the inappropriate indulgence in food or drink is one definition of gluttony that I ran across as I was studying. Noah overindulged in the wine that he had made from the vineyard. Esau, he was very hungry. I'm sure he was very hungry. But you couldn't wait an hour and make something else to eat? or a couple hours and make something else to eat? How much he is recorded as despising his birthright by selling it for the bowl of lentil stew. That undervaluing of the birthright was a form of gluttony in that he overvalued the food test. We don't hear a lot of lessons on gluttony in America today. I know I've never, ever preached about gluttony before. And I cannot recall a time that I've heard a sermon on gluttony. In speaking of this subject today, I should definitely say that I'm preaching to myself more than anyone else in the room. And when I told Dell that I was going to speak about gluttony, he said, maybe you should set a mirror up here to emphasize the point. And that would have been good to emphasize the point. So I called you out on that one, but I do confess to you today, as your brother in Christ, I confess that I struggle with the sin of gluttony, and I don't mean to make light of it. I'm not trying to make light of it. We can make all kinds of excuses about how advertising and and food science and all these things are designed to make us and to encourage us to crave and to overindulge in those tasty things. But ultimately, we need to internalize the admonition that Paul gives us in Romans 13 to make no provision for the flesh, to gratify its desires. That's Romans 13, verse 14. And I should be sitting here on the front pew saying this. I need your prayers, that I will trust God, that He'll provide every need, that He will bring forth in me the fruit of His Spirit. His Spirit will work in my life in every aspect of His fruit, and bringing forth love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And in this context, especially self-control. Proverbs 23. Proverbs 23, verse 1 through 3 reads, "When you sit down to eat with a ruler, observe carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are given to appetite. Do not desire his delicacies, for they are a deceptive food." Put a knife to your throat if you are given to appetite. Sounds dramatic, but allowing my God to be my own stomach, making me an enemy of God, Philippians 3:19. Wow, what if I stumble? The Hebrew writer in Hebrews 12, he calls us to look to Jesus as the founder and perfecter of our faith. He calls us to strive for peace and holiness. And then the Hebrew writer gives Esau as an example of the unholy, because he sold his birthright for a single meal. By this action, he made common that which should be set apart or holy. So Noah and Esau are both, they're not the only ones in the text that face these food tests. Perhaps the most far-reaching of the food tests happens on page 3, when Adam and Eve face a food test in the garden. They see that fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It was good for food. It was a delight to the eyes. And it was good to make you wise. And they reached out their hands and they took it and they ate it and they failed the test. And all mankind feels the effects of that first gluttonous sin. 1 Corinthians 15:22, Paul references that. During the wilderness wandering, the Israelites, as a people, face a food-related test. They get hungry. as one does when you're walking around the desert for 6 weeks or so. They get hungry, and they start to complain against God. And so God sends them manna. But what is it bread? The angel bread. But even then, they're not happy. They're like, where's the meat that we had in Egypt? In Egypt, we sat around the meat pots. So God sends them quail. He sends them an abundance of quail. And in Numbers 11, verse 33, we're told that while the meat was in their teeth, God in his anger sent a plague, striking down a great number of the people. And that place ends up being named the grave of cravings. Kibroth Hatava, the grave of cravings. Or to put it a different way, the grave of gluttony. Sometimes God brings judgment on his people for their gluttonous cravings by giving them over to those cravings, to the things that they crave. You want quail? I got you. How about 3 feet deep, a day's walk from here? A lot of quail. Esau, the individual, the man, he seems to forgive Jacob for all of Jacob's treachery. I mean, he takes 20 years while Jacob's away to do it, perhaps, but at least when Jacob comes back, he doesn't try to kill him. But Esau's descendants, however, the Edomites, they continue to be a thorn in the side of the children of Israel during the entire rest of the story. During the Exodus, they don't allow Israel to come through, when that would be one of the most direct routes from Sinai to Canaan. They won't allow them to pass through their lands, Numbers 20. They're condemned by the prophets, like just about all the prophets. Isaiah and Jeremiah, Ezekiel, they all condemn the actions of the Edomites. Obadiah, that little prophet, that little short prophet there, I don't know how tall he was in stature, but his letter's short. His letter is fully directed at the judgment that God's bringing on Edom, on the children of Esau. All of them foretell a coming judgment on Esau. One passage that cannot be ignored when we're talking about Esau and the judgment on him is the passage from Malachi chapter 1. Malachi chapter 1, verse 2 and 3. I have loved you, says the Lord, but you say, how have you loved us? Is not Esau Jacob's brother, declares the Lord? Yet I have loved Jacob, but Esau I have hated. I have laid waste his hill country and left his heritage to jackals of the desert. Jacob I have loved, but Esau I have hated. All of the commentaries that I read, the Jacob I have loved and Esau I have hated is not talking about an ushy-gushy love for Jacob or an animosity towards Esau, but rather Jacob that I've loved is a choice that God made, and Esau I've hated is a rejection rather than an animosity towards him. For similar use of the terms, you can look at Luke 14 when Jesus is teaching about the cost of discipleship. In the cost of discipleship section there in Luke 14, verse 26, he says, if man doesn't hate his father, his mother, his wife, and his children, he cannot follow me. So the choice and the rejection is not just an animosity towards Esau there. There are several other interpretations that have to be kind of worked through when we're reading about Jacob I have loved, but Esau I've hated. The Armenian interpretation of this passage seems to be, and this is what I've been taught all my life, I believe, is that in Genesis 27, verse 29, Isaac blesses Jacob, thinking that he's Esau. I mean, he's being deceived, but he blesses Jacob, and he says, "Cursed be everyone who curses you, and blessed be everyone who blesses you." And then, later on in chapter 27, verse 41, we're told that Esau hated Jacob. And so by the nature of that blessing, therefore, God hates Esau. Malachi 1, verse 3. So basically, the Armenian interpretation is that it's Esau's mess. He made his bed, and now he has to lay in it. I would submit to you that the biblical interpretation is given to us in Romans 9. Romans 9, verses 10 through 16. And not only so, but also when Rebekah had conceived children by one man, our forefather Isaac, though they were not yet born and had done nothing either good or bad, in order that God's purpose of election might continue, not because of works, but because of him who calls, she was told, the older will serve the younger. As is written, Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. What shall we say then? Is there injustice on God's part? By no means. For he says to Moses, I will have mercy on whom I have mercy, I will have compassion on whom I have compassion. So that it depends not on human will or exertion, but on God who has mercy. God in his sovereign choice elects Jacob, the younger brother, and he rejects Esau, the older brother. And so that this sovereign choice cannot be denied without perhaps going through some significant mental gymnastics, he clearly tells Rebekah that the older will serve the younger in Genesis 25. What if I stumble? What if I fall? What if I lose my step and I make fools of us all? Will the love continue and my walk becomes a crawl? What if I stumble? What if I fall? So why does he still find fault? This is back in Romans chapter 9. So why does he still find fault? For who can resist his will? Paul has anticipated the objection that everyone immediately raises. It's verse 19 of chapter 9. Has the potter no right over the clay? You don't know what purpose God has for you any more than you know the purpose that he has for anyone else. What you intend for evil, he intends for good. Still in Romans chapter 14. Romans chapter 14, verse 4. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? It's before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. Who are you to pass judgment on the servant of another? The servant of another includes you. It's before his own master that he stands or falls, and he will be upheld, for the Lord is able to make him stand. So in conclusion, make no provision for the flesh, Romans 13. Owe no one anything except to love each other, Romans 13, verse 8. Lean on the mighty arms of Jesus as we sing. For if we live, we live to the Lord, and if we die to the Lord. So then whether we live or die, we are the Lord's, Romans 14, verse 8. Little postscript. Are the Edomites excluded from the gospel of Christ? Well, by the early part of the first century, the Edomites have been rolled into a group, kind of engulfed by a group called the Idumeans. The Idumeans were included in the list of peoples that come out to follow Jesus in Mark 3, verse 8. So presumably, They were called by the Father to be grafted back in to the family of God. For our final passage this morning, Exodus chapter 34, and verse 6 and 7, has become one of my favorite Old Testament passages. Exodus 34, verse 6 and 7. This is kind of God's description of himself to Moses. The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God merciful and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love and faithfulness, keeping steadfast love for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, but who will by no means clear the guilty, visiting iniquity of the fathers on the children and the children's children to the third and the fourth generation. So trust and obey. Again, as we sing, trust and obey. And if you stumble, he is the one that's able to make you stand. And that's my thoughts for you this morning. Let's join together.